Coming up, the first college football playoff rankings were announced last night, and everybody, it seems, is mad about where Alabama is. We'll talk about that, and we'll decide if Georgia can stay at number 1. It's all on the way next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to SEC Country Live. I'm Brandon Adams. Happy to have you with us here today. And let's get ready to jump into it. Above the fold, the big story around the SEC, and that's the release of the college football playoff top 25 from last night. Now, I don't have to tell you, many of you already know this, and you would probably agree with this yourself. This is just a fun time of year. There is always going to be a certain amount of college football that really is defined by the debate we have about the sport, and nothing generates debate like the college football playoff rankings, even if we will all agree that what happens in November is not all that consequential for what ultimately happens in January. Those are the rankings that matter the most of all, and the ones that happen in December that lead us into the college football playoff matter even more still than what's happening right now. There's still something fun to debate about who's done what, who's proven what, and how do you compare certain teams to other teams around the world of college football. So let me do this. I pulled this graphic off the ESPN Twitter account. I'll use this to show it to you for what the top 25 looks like right now, and then we will talk about what might have been the most controversial ranking of the night. So let's start here with the top 25 as released last night. You see Pitt, fresh off a loss, down at 25. The first SEC team on this list is Kentucky there at 18. Interesting to see Mike Leach and Mississippi State a spot ahead of the Wildcats there at 17 after beating Kentucky straight up this past Saturday. Then you get to Ole Miss off its loss to Auburn at 16. You've got Auburn and Texas A&M, two teams that will play on Saturday, matched up there at 13 and 14. And then you get to the interesting stuff. The top of the list, two SEC teams, Georgia at 1, no surprise there. But Alabama at number 2 was controversial, given the fact the Crimson Tide has a loss, and the teams rated below it, like Michigan State and Cincinnati, have not been beaten yet. Also, Oregon, Ohio State, two one-loss teams, the committee favoring Oregon in its head-to-head win against Ohio State there last night. But there was a lot to be said about why Alabama with a loss was number 2, whereas unbeaten teams like Michigan State below the Crimson Tide, and a Cincinnati team from the group of 5 who has some folks out there trying to argue for it. Why it's not ranked in the top 4 at all, and seemingly by being placed at number 6, excluding the Bearcats, at least for now, from the college football playoff conversation. Let me say this real quickly, and I'll kind of get more deeply into the Alabama part of this. I do think the committee made the right decision last night putting Oregon ahead of Ohio State. I think eventually Ohio State's going to have the kind of wins, if it keeps winning, against the rest of its Big Ten East foes that will give it a better resume than Oregon. Head-to-head results matter to me to a point, but they are not the end of the argument necessarily. The head-to-head win for Oregon has value at the moment, but Ohio State can eventually do enough from a resume standpoint, I believe, to distance itself from the Ducks, despite the fact that Oregon beat Ohio State earlier this year. As far as the Cincinnati part of this goes, listen, on the one hand, Cincinnati is clearly a good team. They played Georgia down to the wire in last year's Peach Bowl, and there's enough continuity with both teams to at least take something from that. Also, I would say that in the college football playoff era, there's never been a group of 5 team in this discussion that has a better win than the one that Cincinnati has this year on the road at Cincinnati. That's something else that also matters to me. There is a resume here for Cincinnati that's just a little bit more substantial than previous group of 5 teams, including the UCF team that proclaimed itself national champions a few years ago. But that's still not the same thing as saying that Cincinnati's deserving of the college football playoff. The fact of the matter is we know that the committee has a preconceived notion. Frankly, I probably hold this notion there as well, that the best version of the sport involves the big macro programs, not the group of 5 team that's not good for business, and frankly, probably not clearly one of the 4 best teams in the country as it is. And if you wanted to make the case for Cincinnati, right now the Bearcats themselves aren't making it very easy for you to do that. The American Athletic Conference is not what it has been. It's probably weaker this year than it's typically been, and you look at the last couple of weeks, scuffling a bit against Tulane. The week before that, not exactly super impressive against Navy. That right now Cincinnati's just making it too easy for the committee to exclude them, and as long as that opportunity is available, that's exactly the chance the committee is going to take. But when you look at Alabama, the discussion of how in the world could a 2-loss team, or I should say a team that already has taken a loss, they're not a 2-loss team yet, although they might be before the season's done, but how in the world could a 1-loss team be ranked number 2 in the country right now? I want to give you what Kirk Herbstreit had to say about this. But before that, though, let me play you a little bit of the audio, and this is about a minute's worth. This is a little bit of the audio from ESPN last night when, shortly after Georgia was revealed as number 1, Alabama was then revealed as number 2. And you can hear the way that Joey Galloway and Reese Davis and Greg McElroy, some of the other analysts on the desk last night, reacted to the one-loss Crimson Tide being the number 2 team in the country ahead of a handful of unbeatens. This gives you a taste of how controversial this was, ESPN TV from last night.
Alabama.
Wow.
Reese, that's the first time I've seen you react. That's the first time I've seen you react to something.
I'm a little shocked by it, just to be honest. Now, they've got a lot of wins over teams with winning records. Solid win over Ole Miss. And what turns out to be a pretty good win against Mississippi State as well. The thing is, for everybody who's going to get all up in arms about this, as you look ahead, this is going to take care of itself. Alabama will either lose and not get to the SEC championship game to play Georgia, or they'll get there and lose, or they'll win out and they'll be in.
Reese, but having them at number 2, though, having them at number 2, if they win out, that still opens the door to the possibility of them not falling outside of the top 4 with a close loss to Georgia. It opens the door.
No way. So 2 losses, it won't happen.
Are you not surprised?
I mean, let's everybody else. Yes, I'm surprised.
Okay, so because we're talking about an Alabama team, which I have a ton of respect for, and we talked about this earlier, they've shown cracks, and they've shown cracks twice. Texas A&M, second half of Florida, they've shown cracks that surprise.
So let me first of all say this in response to that clip. I think that Joey Galloway is right, just factually correct. His opinion, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the factual nature of Galloway's statement there, I believe, is true. That by being number 2 in November, it becomes easier to also still be in the top 4 after the first Saturday in December. That if Georgia beats Alabama in the SEC championship game and the game is close, then by being number 2 right now, and presumably if you keep winning, remaining in the top 4 of the week-to-week rankings, that if you lose close to Georgia in the SEC championship, the chances of somehow staying in the top 4 are made easier. Whereas if you're not in the top 4 right now, then that just becomes a more difficult proposition. It's hard to move up after a loss, whereas it's a little bit easier to not move down if you're following what I'm saying there. I think it's really interesting that guys like Reese Davis, and I think if I heard the voice correctly there, that was Greg McElroy, those voices immediately disagree with Galloway on that. I don't think that Galloway's wrong. I do think there is some significance to Alabama being rated at number 2. Now, Kirk Herbstreit had a response to all of this, and in that particular clip, they had to move on after the initial debate because they wanted to show Michigan State number 3. But then later on in that night, Herbstreit had a chance to weigh in, and he said a lot of like what Reese Davis said there a moment ago. He says, it doesn't matter where the heck Alabama is in these rankings. He says, if they win out, beat Georgia, they're in. If they lose to Georgia, they're out. No matter what happens, it still comes down to the game in Atlanta. Now, y'all know this, or at least if you're a regular viewer to this program, you know I'm not an Alabama fan. I'm a Georgia fan. And if anything, if you want to say I'm an Alabama hater, I don't think I'm a hater of anybody, in that kind of, hating type sense. But I would love to obviously see Alabama move off as a fan here. I'm talking about as a fan. I'd love to see Alabama move off the stage as the premier program in college football. It makes more room for my team to potentially be there, but it's also just beyond that more interesting to have more than just Alabama that's potentially on the dominant front end of the sport. So if you need to hear me claim my bias going into this discussion, I'm happy to do that for those of you that feel like you want to hear that. However, all of that said, I think there's something pretty clearly going on here. And you can look on Twitter last night, anti-SEC guy like Joel Klatt, other ESPN people like Bill Conley, some of these other high follower count, relatively well-known college football names all weighing in. And to the extent that some of the folks doing that have a tie to a conference or a tie to a program or a tie to whatever else, it's fairly obvious that they were hoping that after Alabama lost to Texas A&M, that they wouldn't have to worry about Alabama for a year. Now, I'm saying this as a Georgia fan, somebody whose team is likely going to have to go through the Crimson Tide to win a national championship. But you don't hear Georgia fans really complaining about where Alabama's ranked because Georgia already knows this. Georgia knows by virtue of playing in the SEC that its path towards a national championship goes through Tuscaloosa no matter what. But if you're in Columbus, Ohio, or Norman, Oklahoma, or Eugene, Oregon, or Cincinnati, or somewhere like that, I think it became easy to maybe imagine, oh my gosh, what if we won a national championship this year, and what if we didn't have to beat Alabama to do so? What if Alabama this year just magically is not good enough? After all, that's what is happening at Clemson. Remember, Clemson was top 4 to begin the year, yet over the course of the season has proven itself not to be in that category, and it becomes wishful thinking to say, ooh, maybe the same thing's going to happen to Alabama there as well. We started the year thinking you got to go through Clemson and Alabama. What if you don't have to go through either one? Then Alabama loses to Texas A&M after having played close against Florida, and all of a sudden that belief gets bolstered even more of, oh my gosh, could we really be this lucky? Could we really win a national championship and not have to go through the Alabama Crimson Tide? And what the College Football Playoff Selection Committee told you last night, and I believe correctly so, is they told you that no, the road to a national championship still goes through Alabama. That's not the same thing as Alabama's going to win the national title, because frankly, I don't know that they are. But the road to a national championship still goes through Alabama. And can you honestly make an argument for why it shouldn't? That's not the same thing as saying that Alabama's clearly the best and you're arguing in favor of them being number 1 or number 2 or whatever else. But given where Alabama has been in the playoff era, in every playoff but one since 2014, and given what they've done thus far this season in comparison to everybody else, I mean, Joey Galloway a moment ago said that Alabama's shown some cracks. Well, who hasn't shown the occasional crack every now and then? Maybe not Georgia to this point in time, the close game against Clemson week 1 notwithstanding. But beyond that, we've seen cracks with every team. We've seen cracks with Ohio State, lost to Oregon, played closer than they should have last Saturday against Penn State. We've seen cracks with Oklahoma. They were struggling to even beat Kansas a couple of weeks ago. There's really no team you look at and say, well, that team doesn't have some crack. So I don't know that the presence of a blemish is an argument against a team, and including a team like Alabama. Now, there are a lot of Alabama fans that are privately wondering, well, are we as good as we've been in recent years, to the fans who want to use the word we? Are we as good as we've been in recent years? Don't know that yet. But we're not asking if this Alabama team is as good as the one in 2020 or the one in 2019 or 2018 or the last national championship before that in 2017. We don't know how Alabama compares to recent Alabama teams. There is reason to believe this Alabama team is inferior, certainly to last year's team and maybe the previous playoff teams before that. But right now, the appropriate comparison is not Alabama to its previous self, but Alabama to the present tense, the rest of college football. And there's plenty of reason to believe that for now, there's no obvious reason why Alabama shouldn't be number 2 in the country. And all that hand-wringing and all that controversy related to Alabama being ranked as high as it is, that sounds to me like a bunch of scared college football fans that don't want the responsibility of having to take down Alabama. Now, you don't hear another SEC team like Georgia saying that, because Georgia knows one way or another it's got to beat Alabama at least once. Maybe it has to beat them twice. But Georgia and the rest of the SEC's made its peace with that a long time ago. There's plenty around the rest of the world of college football that would love nothing more than for the committee to do what they themselves haven't been able to do, which is take Alabama out of the college football playoff picture. It's very hard to do that on the field. That's why you hear so many of these analysts and coaches and whatever else hoping that happens. They're hoping that some people in a boardroom can do what's much more difficult for them to do on a football field, which is eliminate Alabama for the national championship conversation. And last night, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee said they're not going to make it quite that easy. All right, as far as the rest of all this goes, Georgia at number 1 on this list, and really no debate and discussion and question about that whatsoever. In fact, going into Tuesday night, Georgia essentially already knew it was going to be number 1, and that means that when Kirby Smart was facing the reporters on Tuesday evening ahead of the eventual ranking that was going to come out later on that night, Smart was ready to go with the exact kind of thing that you would expect him to say upon being asked about what do you tell your team about the number 1 college football playoff ranking. Smart didn't officially have that ranking when he was asked this question, but his answer is just the same as it ever would be. This is Kirby Smart on that topic from last night.
They've had this night 7 times, and I would dare y'all to know how many of those 7 actually won the national championship. 1's the answer. So my point would be to the players, and I made the point today and we'll continue to make the point, why? Why did only 1 of the 7 win it? And it's pretty easy, because it either went to their head, it affected them, they didn't continue to grow and get better. And, the narrative out there will be, people will say, I'm not saying this because I certainly don't think it's true at all. But the narrative is what distorts young people's mind that they read on social media and things, that there's this, upper echelon of teams, and then there's this other group. And I don't think that's the case at all. I don't see it that way. I see every team in that top 10, top 15 capable of beating each other any given Saturday. So what we better do is distance ourselves from everybody else and get better, because we got some tough roads coming down the pipe starting this week and every week to follow when you play in the SEC. I told them they could tune in and watch the Braves, but there's no need to watch the other.
So it's kind of funny to hear Kirby Smart reference the Braves there at the end. Obviously, a lot of SEC country last night, also Braves country. Happy that the Braves won the World Series. Smart says, I'll let my team watch baseball, but I don't want them watching those college football playoff rankings. He wants the team to have the appropriate mindset moving forward for the rest of the season. I think for a lot of fans, whether it be a Georgia fan, in some cases just curious about this topic, or other SEC fans who may be somewhat bewildered about the fact that as Georgia moves through all of this, dominant on defense, playing every game in, for the most part, blowout fashion, there's also the continued oddity of what's going on for Georgia at quarterback. The fact that we are now led to believe that JT Daniels, after previously being injured, is now healthy enough to play, but at least against Florida on Saturday, he didn't. And there's no guarantee of what may happen for Daniels against Missouri on Saturday. That's Georgia's next game coming up here this week. And so I think it's leaving some to wonder, well, if you're not going to allow the focus on being number one derail your playoff chances, your chance at winning a national championship, it seems like there's a growing chorus of voices asking, are you potentially going to run the risk of how you're handling this quarterback situation derail you and your chance to win a national championship? After all, before the season began, JT Daniels was named the clear and unquestioned starter, but since returning from injury, or maybe because of the injury, however you want to say this, somehow that status that Daniels once had, he doesn't appear to have anymore. And so this has been a hot topic around Georgia now for quite some time. In fact, so much so that last night in that same press conference that you just heard Smart speaking in, he was asked directly, who's going to start a quarterback for you on Saturday? Does Daniels get his chance, or is it going to be Stetson Bennett, who did struggle at times against Florida last week? Direct question. This is the answer that Kirby Smart gave to that.
Will Stetson be starting this weekend? And in regard to JT shaking off, any rust, how much of a necessity is it that he's able to continue to do that in these 4 remaining regular season games?
I think it's important for both of them to continue to develop, make good decisions. I mean, part of playing quarterback is accuracy, decision-making, mobility. Those things are the critical factors. I mean, anybody can hand it off. We all know that. And anybody can make our run checks and decisions. But it's the decisions when the ball's in your hand and you're having to make decisions where you're going with it, where you're throwing it, all those things that are the biggest deciding factors. But yeah, I'm pleased with where both of them are.
Is Stetson going to be starting again?
Like I said, I'm pleased with where both of them are, and I think both of them are doing a great job.
So I'll admit something here for a moment. I don't really know quite how to interpret what Smart says there about the quarterbacks. Now, I think the message over the course of the last few weeks has been pretty clear that Daniels was going to have to regain his status through what happens on the practice field. And maybe he's on his way to doing that, maybe he's not. Obviously, the media only gets to see a small window in practice. The average fan gets to see none of that. So we really don't know what's privately happening during practice. But for a guy in JT who's been incredibly limited at practice for most of the last few weeks, the fact that he seemingly is no longer limited, that's his opportunity and his window to show that he's supposed to be the starting quarterback and maybe the only quarterback playing for Georgia again. That's the way that things were before the season began. And if it's going to be that way again, that's when and the way in which it's likely going to need to happen. And yet it's pretty clear that this past Saturday, that hadn't happened yet. No indication if it will happen before the season's done or not. But on Saturday, it had not happened as of yet. And you're left to wonder, well, is Smart going to make the wrong choice here? Because for the most part, even Stetson Bennett admitted and agreed that he did not play a good game on Saturday against Florida. And for so many people, this seems to remind them of some of the stuff that Kirby Smart's done from a quarterback standpoint before. And so here's all I can say about that. We obviously have a lot of Georgia fans that tune in and watch because I do Dog Nation Daily each and every day, and a lot of other non-Georgia fans are curious about this too because they'd love to see Smart make a bad decision. They'd love to see Georgia stumble and open the door for somebody else to either win the SEC championship or someone else make the college football playoff or whatever door could be opened by Georgia tripping up here. They'd love to be able to see that. Here's all I can say is that Kirby Smart knows what's at stake if he makes the wrong choice. If he were to stick with Bennett and not play JT Daniels, and if Georgia, who's number one right now, were to finish anything below number one, it's going to be easy for people to say that Smart's decision related to quarterback became a big reason why that's true. Smart's fully aware of this. He's also, I would imagine, aware that the choice that he's making now at least rhymes with some of the other previous choices that he's also made in the past, maybe most specifically 2018 when Jake Fromm was chosen over Justin Fields, that this, to some people, is just going to feel like what has happened in Georgia's past. Kirby Smart's quite aware of that. He knows the stakes of the decision. However, I would say that maybe what the average fan is not as aware of, and what Smart, because of his ability to be inside the program and seeing not just what happens on Saturdays during games, but what happens during the week, he's aware of the invisible, unseen part of this too, that he knows that there's a risk in playing the wrong quarterback, but there's also a risk in handling a personnel decision like this that upends what I think for Smart right now has been a very enjoyable season on a team that's filled with the kind of positive chemistry that seems to be able to contribute to winning. The notion that Smart says you want to ignore being ranked number one right now, I believe Smart truly believes he has a team right now that's capable of blocking all that out. Georgia players have used the phrase blue-collar mentality. In other words, willing to show up and do hard work without it getting a lot of accolades. A lot of these guys may one day have a white-collar bank account. They may be millionaires playing at the NFL level, but they're playing like bring your hard hat, lunch pail, blue-collar workers right now at the college level, and it seems like Smart's slow to want to do anything that potentially changes all of that. At least that's the impression you possibly get. So we don't yet know how this quarterback situation is going to play out for Georgia. We do know that Smart is almost certainly aware of the stakes. And for a lot of teams looking below Georgia right now, as the Dogs have the number one spot, they'd love nothing more than for UGA to have an unforced error, to make some sort of decision, some sort of mistake that opens the door for everybody else. But with Georgia playing the way that it is right now, you are also left to wonder, does it even matter at the moment? Who's currently playing quarterback? We'll get your comments coming up on this in just a moment. It's SEC Country Live. I'm Brandon Adams. Happy to have you with us. I also want to give a big shout out before we get some comments to my friends at Merriweather and Tharp. I'm here in our brand new SEC Country headquarters at the Atlanta area, and obviously you hear me talking about the state of Georgia and Atlanta a good bit here. And one of the things you also hear me saying on this show, I talk about my friends at Merriweather and Tharp. I say that they're your source for Georgia divorce. They're based here in the state of Georgia. But what's cool is that you don't have to be a Georgian to take advantage of the expertise that Merriweather and Tharp has when it comes to the divorce process. You can be in anywhere that SEC country reaches, which is all across the SEC country landscape, the Carolinas and Alabama, Mississippi, into Louisiana, Texas, Florida, wherever else, Arkansas, really, of course, SEC fans across the country checking in there as well. Wherever you are, Merriweather and Tharp can be a resource for you there as well. So let me give you the website to go to. It's theatlantadivorceteam.com. theatlantadivorceteam.com. Let me tell you one that's also a valuable website for you to remember, because there are tons of free resources, blog posts, podcasts, an opportunity to set up a free initial consultation, get your question asked and answered in an informal environment where you can actually get some really quality information here. The divorce process can be scary and confusing. There are specific aspects of the law that impact your situation. And until you talk to an attorney, you're not going to really know what the best decision for you to make is. Well, don't just talk to any attorney. Talk to people that have been doing this forever, those who are truly your source for Georgia divorce, your source for divorce all across SEC country. That's what Merriweather and Tharp is. So they're based in Atlanta, but you can reach out to them from anywhere. TheAtlantaDivorceTeam.com is the website. TheAtlantaDivorceTeam.com. That'll get you in touch with Merriweather and Tharp. We're going to dive through. We're going to get some comments here. We'll also get into what has turned out to be a very interesting week for Florida coach Dan Mullen. So that is on the way here too. Also, picks for the upcoming weekend's worth of games in the SEC. We will hit that. Kind of an odd comment from LSU coach Ed Orgeron, who clearly is not enjoying himself. At least it doesn't appear to be, as the lame duck head coach of LSU as that season rolls on there in Baton Rouge. And if he wasn't having fun before now, he may be having even less fun after Saturday going to Tuscaloosa to play Alabama. So all of that is on the way. But first, we like to be interactive around here. We like to give you a chance to have some comments. We're actually going to skip a guest today just so you can have more time for commenting here on the show. So we'll do that right now. Donnie Lackey checks in to say, I admit that Georgia's good, but Bama's no slouch either. We will wait till game time and see who's the best. I think that's very appropriate to say, that Georgia unquestionably is number one right now. But you heard Kirby Smart say this a moment ago, that not questioning Georgia's status as the number one team in the country in the first Saturday in November is a far different thing from saying there's also no debate about who's going to be number one at the end of the season. There very clearly is still a debate there. And I can tell you this on the behalf of Georgia fans, there is going to be a lot of conversation if it truly is these two teams that match up. Because keep in mind this now. I think some of our folks in the comment section have already mentioned this. I was kind of peering in on some of these a little earlier. While Georgia's path to the SEC championship was already clinched, they won the East last year. No one's ever won it sooner in a season than Georgia did. Two other have matched on the same date. But the point here is, while Georgia is locked in and ready to go in the SEC championship, there is still some work to be done in the SEC West. And the game on Saturday, and we'll talk more about this in a moment, the game on Saturday between Texas A&M and Auburn could have major implications on the SEC West race if Auburn can then pull an upset at the end of the season against Alabama. And that's no wishful thinking, unlikely, hypothetical scenario. Alabama's lost its last two games at Jordan-Hare Stadium, the stadium that will host the game this upcoming November as well, in just a few weeks' time. So there is still some intrigue of, will Alabama truly punch its ticket for the SEC championship? Georgia's been there under Kirby Smart 3 times, but only played Alabama once. Alabama actually has a nasty habit of not making the SEC title game, if we're truly being honest here for a moment. But beyond that, if it is Georgia and Alabama, I can promise you there is a lot of talk on the part of Georgia fans about how you do truly get over that hump. Bryce Young's a good quarterback. Bryce Young's an explosive quarterback. He's the kind of quarterback that could still lead Alabama to a national championship. Will Anderson, for as good as the Georgia defense has been, on an individual player basis, Will Anderson's been as good as anybody. He's truly a force to be reckoned with, the kind of guy that you have to know where he's coming from off the edge each and every time, and you may have to use multiple bodies to block him up to keep him from wreaking havoc against your quarterback, whether it's JT Daniels or Stetson Bennett. That's just kind of the way that that goes. So I can promise you, I talk to Georgia fans each and every day. While they're confident about their team, and some of them may be in here making big boasts about Georgia beating Alabama, a lot of that's just to kind of pull the chains of the Alabama fans who are here. The Georgia conversation that we have each and every day, for the most part, has centered around Georgia fans' belief the Alabama game is the kind of tough football game that Georgia has to be at its absolute best in order to win. James D. Stenson says Bryce Young wins the Heisman. He might. We've made our case around here for Georgia nose guard Jordan Davis as a representative for just how good this Georgia defense has been all season long. We're big believers in that. You also look at what the running back from Michigan State did last week. You got to think he's now in that conversation a bit there as well. Brian Whitehead kind of going back and forth here in a little bit of a discussion. You always love to see that ongoing here. David Kendall says Georgia hasn't played anyone worth a dang yet, especially a team with an offense that will give them trouble. Well, now, hold on. That's not quite fair here, because I remember when Georgia played Florida last week, that was supposed to be the offense that gave them trouble, and it just didn't happen. And when Georgia played Kentucky with, Will Levis, a quarterback, and Kentucky was ranked in the top 15, and you had Liam Cohen, offensive coordinator, that was supposed to be the offense that gave them trouble. And then before that, it was supposed to be Traylon Burks, the wide receiver, and what Arkansas was bringing to the table. Some of the reason why it appears that, Georgia just hasn't played very good offenses is because what Georgia has done to those offenses. So, this notion that Georgia hasn't yet played an offense good enough to threaten its defense, I'm not quite so sure that team exists in this country right now. We'll get a few more comments. Marvin Roach says, I think that Georgia beats Alabama twice this year, leaving no question ever. Yes, we can. So I think that's interesting, and I think that Marvin's kind of right there with me on what Joey Galloway said a little earlier, the ESPN analyst, that even as a 2-loss team, that Alabama could still make the college football playoff. That's what it would take for Georgia to beat them twice. And if we go back to 2018 for a moment, Alabama beat Georgia 35-28 in that year's SEC championship game. That was Georgia's second loss. It also lost at LSU back in October. And there was a huge discussion. Remember, Kirk Herbstreit was in on this. A lot of folks were in on this. Huge discussion that Georgia, as a 2-loss team, should have made that year's playoff over either Oklahoma or Notre Dame. That was a hot topic, not just on like SEC Country Live, but on ESPN there as well. And ultimately, Georgia got excluded, but they came very close to getting in. So much so that Kirk Herbstreit was arguing for them on TV that December. So let's say the same thing rolls around again. This is an Alabama team that also has the prestige of being the incumbent. They won last year's national championship. They've won multiple championships in the playoff era. Do you think Alabama, if it were to lose to Georgia 35-28, might have a chance of getting a little bit of a benefit of the doubt that Georgia didn't get back in 2018? I kind of think there's a chance it might, especially if it's in comparison to teams like Cincinnati or Wake Forest, who there's just not a huge appetite to see on a national championship stage. I think that might be probably true. Let's see what else is going on here. We'll get some YouTube comments there too. Shalika Kennedy Jackson says, averaging 38 points per game. We put in JT Daniels. That number's going to jump to 48, so she's feeling good about JT Daniels. Let's see what else is going on here. Christopher Shepard, I guess, taking some shots here at the Georgia offense. I mean, keep this in mind. While the Georgia offense is nowhere near as high-powered as what Alabama was a year ago, what LSU was the year before that, this is a Georgia team that's also scored 30 or more points in every game but one this season. So, this notion that Georgia's not scoring points against anyone, whether it's Bennett at quarterback or Daniels at quarterback, that's not really backed up by the stats particularly well. Tim Glover says, as a Bama fan, Georgia scares the heck out of me. So he weighs in there on that. Holly Thatzel says, oh, good grief. Florida, no true opportunity to take it. They can't finish a game. So Holly not too impressed with those Gators right now. Chris Kirk says, Saban renting permanently in Coach Smart's head. If that's true, you got to say the same thing's true on the other side there as well. I mean, there are a lot of Alabama fans that seem fairly obsessed with every move that Kirby Smart makes. I think you got to kind of say that a little bit. Let me go to YouTube for a moment. I'll get a few more comments over here. Bo Molinari says A&M's much better now than it was early this season. Bo's an Aggies fan, but I think he's 100% right about that. A&M was a team that I was high on before the year began. Did not pick them to win the SEC West, but did expect them to be top 10 team and a real threat and a contender to everyone on its schedule. And now, even after an injury to a starting quarterback, it's becoming fairly obvious that A&M is becoming that team, that they have a chance now. Saturday's a big test because after, losing at home to Mississippi State and having people say, Kyle Fields not a huge home field advantage, that Aggies fans, for all that you talk about with the 12th man, it's not creating the real home field advantage you want to have there. Well, they went out and, beat Alabama after that. And all of a sudden you didn't really hear anybody complaining about the Aggies crowd after that. But on Saturday against Auburn, you've got an experienced coach against a first-year coach. You've got, multiple years worth of recruiting success against an Auburn program that's recruiting. It's really as a shadow of what it once was. You've got a lot going for A&M here. This is a big test for the Jimbo Fisher era. In a lot of ways, a win like this against Auburn is just as important as the upset you pulled against Alabama because, frankly, almost anybody can win in an upset. But can you then follow up the upset win with a win as a favorite, getting a win when people expect you to get a win? This is the moment where Jimbo Fisher gets a chance to prove what he is as a program, what he is as an architect of a program like Texas A&M. This game is much bigger for A&M than it is Auburn, much bigger all the way across the board because Brian Harsin's a first-year coach and everything he does from this point in time is essentially gravy. It's all just add-on. But for Jimbo Fisher, even though no one really expected him to overtake Alabama this year, for Jimbo Fisher, this was a moment to take that next step. Well, the game against Auburn is the next step. The Alabama win, if you lose 2 other times, doesn't mean much. It just doesn't. 2 or 3 other times. It just doesn't mean much if you lose those games. But if you can win this game again, all of a sudden you're looking at putting a 10-2 type record together in this SEC West. You better believe that'd be a nice performance. G. Greg's Bama boy agrees on that. He says it's a big game between Auburn and A&M. He's a Bama fan, but he recognized that, and that's correct. Rustin Robinson says Auburn is the same boat as A&M. Both teams getting better as the season goes along. That's true. We were correct in our pick of Auburn last week against Ole Miss. We kind of saw that coming, that this was a big spot to play well at home. Auburn is a team, even in the Brian Harsin administration, it appears, that's just going to be the same thing that's been the last couple of years. They're just a far different team at home than on the road. Now, they did go on the road to win at LSU when that win still meant a little something. But for the most part, this is a team in Auburn that, for whatever reason, just stands up big when it has the big home game. Can it do something like that, though, on the big away game, on the big road game on Saturday? The commenter, Rustin's right here. They've played much better. And can they follow that up on the road? I'm telling you right now, this is good TV. Auburn and A&M is very good TV. Foster Moss says if the committee opens the door for a 2-loss team to make it, they've got some explaining to do, obviously referencing Alabama. But Foster, let me ask, and I know you're not an Alabama fan, so we can kind of talk about this, I guess, somewhat objectively. Like, what do you want the committee to do? You want the committee to choose the team with the prettier record, or do you want the committee to choose the team that might be the better overall team? Like, let's say you had 12-0 Wake Forest. I mean, let me pull up the Wake Forest schedule real quick, and then we got to get on with the rest of the show in a moment. But let's say that – hold on. All right, let's pull this up. So this is Wake Forest. This is what they're going to play this year. Old Dominion, Norfolk State, Florida State, at Virginia, Louisville, at Syracuse. They won 40-37 in overtime, by the way. Army, Duke, and now the rest of the way. You've got UNC, a decent North Carolina State team, at Clemson, which is not an easy game, and at Boston College, which is kind of not an easy game. But given all of that, is there anything about that 12-0 that would make you feel good about Wake Forest? And let's say Wake Forest meets Pitt in the ACC title game. Pitt got Kenny Pickett, good quarterback. This team that scored a lot of points this year, but they also lost to Western Michigan earlier this year, and they lost to Miami this past Saturday. I mean, is there anything validating about a win against a team like Pitt in an ACC title game? In other words, let's say that Wake Forest is 13-0. Do you really believe, do I really believe, does anybody really believe that 13-0 Wake Forest is truly better than what might be 11-2? Am I doing the math right? An 11-2 Alabama if it were to lose at Texas A&M and lose in the SEC championship versus Georgia. Now you say, well, it's Wake Forest is more deserving because it went undefeated. More deserving becomes a very subjective argument, but I mean, what if Alabama was playing Wake Forest's schedule? How much damage could they do against that? So I understand your point of, hey, if you take a 2-loss team and you put them in the college football playoff, we haven't crossed that threshold yet, putting a 2-loss team in the playoff. But if it's 2-loss team coming out of this SEC, especially this SEC West, if the game against Georgia is close and Georgia wins it close, I mean, you say, well, they'd have some explaining to do if they did that. They would have some explaining to do, but that doesn't mean there isn't also a pretty significant explanation that could be made, right? Would you agree with that? That's my case on that. A couple more quick comments, and we'll get back to the regular conversation. Sacred Grove says it's as high-powered by the numbers when you take out the trash points. So I'm not sure which one he's referencing there, which offense he's referencing. Bo Molinari also bringing up Oregon being ranked ahead of Ohio State, which to me is the appropriate thing to do right now. Oregon has won head-to-head. But if you give Ohio State wins against Michigan State, wins against Michigan, a Big Ten championship game win, there are wins that Ohio State can gain the rest of the way. I believe it will get them. There are wins that Ohio State can gain the rest of the way that I think would render the head-to-head win for Oregon less meaningful. In other words, appropriate to rank Oregon ahead of Ohio State right now because the Ohio State resume is not substantial enough to disregard the head-to-head loss. But if Ohio State wins out in a tougher conference, certainly a better division, but a tougher conference overall, then at that point in time, the fact that Oregon beat Ohio State head-to-head would not be enough for me to exclude Ohio State from the college football playoff over Oregon. They may both get in, but it's still, to me, appropriate to potentially consider Ohio State ahead of Oregon if Ohio State wins the remainder of its games. Danny Whitson checks in to say that it's interesting hearing all of you guys talk about all these good teams, and I'm just happy my Vols aren't embarrassing this year. LOL. Still cheering for to say go Big Orange. But my aunt graduated from Georgia, not cheering for them, but it would feel good for her if it worked out. So I would say it's a very interesting Tennessee game on Saturday. Against Kentucky, two rivals. Kentucky reeling after losing to Mississippi State, but coming back home. Slight favorite there. I'd say that game's actually pretty interesting there on Saturday. We'll talk more about that as the time rolls on. Let me quickly do this before we get there, though. Interesting this week to see Florida coach Dan Mullen taking a bunch of heat for what happened in the loss to Georgia on Saturday, and the fact that it just seems like there was an overwhelming level of talent that Smart and Georgia had at its disposal that Dan Mullen couldn't match, and all of this seemingly pointing back to recruiting. And Dan Mullen getting very bristly and prickly about all of that. Let's start with the post-game press conference on Saturday, because this leads us up to, believe it or not, something else that happened on this topic here today. This is Dan Mullen getting questioned by the media about what's going on with Florida recruiting and why isn't there as much talent in Gainesville as there appears to be in Athens and other places. This is Dan Mullen.
Yeah, Dan, from a big picture standpoint, do you feel like your staff is holding the rope well enough in recruiting right now?
In recruiting, I don't know. We just finished the game. It's a game day today, so yeah, we gotta continue to recruit harder. We gotta continue to get better. We gotta continue to get great players. I think our guys recruit hard. We gotta find guys who fit the Gator standard to come be a part of this, and and are excited to come play for the Gators and have that, guys that have that great energy, have that great desire to come play for the Gators.
So you can hear Mullen there not really wanting to talk very much about the subject of recruiting. That would become a theme for him, including in the rest of that press conference on Saturday night, because credit to the media covering the Gators, after Mullen pushed back hard on, hey, I don't want to talk about recruiting right now, there was still more to be asked of Mullen for exactly what is going on with the talent level you're bringing here to this Gators program and this so-called Gators standard that you brag about. More of reporters kind of grilling Mullen on that topic. Take a listen to this again from Saturday night.
How big do you think the talent gap is between these two programs right now?
Well, we were better last year and they were better this year. What do you think? That's.
Do you want to answer that?
I don't know. You sure? You can do what you got to do right there. But I think last year we were able to win. This year we weren't. So I don't know. That's where it is.
I love the deadpan response from the reporter when Mullen kind of asked the rhetorical question of, I don't know, what do you think? And the reporter says, do you really want me to answer that? Do you really want to know what I think about that? Also, I wonder what Florida fans would think about the notion that Dan Mullen says, hey, look at us last year. Look at what we did a year ago. We were better than Georgia a year ago. What was 4-loss season still? Are you really celebrating what happened a year ago as any great accomplishment for Florida? I wonder how Florida fans feel about that at the moment. Forget what rivals to the Gators might say. What do Florida fans themselves think about all of that? My guess is they might have a little bit of a problem with that. In fact, some of the heat that Mullen was taking about the level of recruiting he's brought to Florida after the loss to Georgia, some of that actually had started before the Georgia game. Let's go back to the previous week when Dan Mullen, even before he got beat 30-47 by the Dogs, was still dealing with some of the same kind of questions. This was from that previous Monday. Dan Mullen taking some heat once again. Take a listen to this.
On the recruiting front, were you able to go out and recruit during
we had our coaches all out on the road. I can't go into where everybody went specifically, but our coach, we had coaches out on the road.
But you personally did
I'm not going to get into the specifics of where everybody went and what's going on with it, but
not you?
I'm not even going to comment on any of that stuff of who was where, when, why, and how.
Once again, listen, I don't know who these Florida reporters are, but they're grilling Mullen pretty good here when he says, listen, I'm not going to get into who was where on the recruiting trail. This is during the bye week when other coaches like Georgia's Kirby Smart was seen on the sideline for Arch Manning's game, the 2023 quarterback out of Louisiana. Mullen was not spotted, and when not satisfied with the answer that he gets, the reporter comes back again and saying, but what about you? What about you? Were you out recruiting? It's almost like the what did you know, when did you know it thing from politics and things like that. Like, were you out recruiting? And there's plenty of reason to believe that Mullen was not recruiting because he's not actually currently able to because of the NCAA sanctions that are hanging over the program's head. And maybe Mullen just didn't want to admit that right there. But he's taken a lot of heat from recruiting. In fact, Let's go back to this past Monday, the couple days removed from the loss to Georgia after the topic of recruiting and Mullen's failings in that regard were such a hot topic in the post-game press conference. It had not really died down on Monday either. And once again, Dan Mullen just did not want this subject to come up. And he said something, well, that he may have to try to live down for the rest of his life, the kind of thing that does not ring well around the ears of those around SEC country. This is Dan Mullen once again getting very, very defensive on what's not happening for Florida recruiting. This is from Monday.
Coach, the topic of recruiting has come up a lot the last couple of days from a few angles. Is a different approach needed for the level of consistency?
Well, we're in the season right now. We'll do recruiting after the season, and when it gets this recruiting time, we can talk about recruiting.
Sounds good.
Okay. Next question.
I mean, nobody says next question in an unironic fashion anymore. It's become such a cliche that it's almost a joke. But Mullen really tries to next question that reporter for daring ask, hey, I'm kind of confused about where you come down on recruiting. And then Mullen's like, we're going to talk about recruiting during the recruiting part of the year. What a disaster. Even if he was partially taken out of context, which is probably true, Mullen's inability to handle that moment without getting defensive just speaks to what I believe is a real inauthenticity about Dan Mullen. He's just not comfortable enough in his own skin to be comfortable in situations like that. You can casually deflect without obviously letting it be known that you have a clear problem with the line of questioning. And when you see Mullen sweating like he's under a interrogator spotlight about an issue like this, it makes you wonder, gosh, is he really this uncomfortable trying to put a recruiting class together that he can't even talk about it? That he wants to relegate it to, as he says, the recruiting time of the year? And you know it was really bad for two reasons. First of all, shortly after all that went down, Florida canceled all media activities for the rest of the week. The only media appearance Mullen was going to make the rest of the week was the typical Wednesday SEC coaches teleconference. He was there today. And the other reason why you know all of that was bad is Mullen had to do the what had happened was response to the fact that he caused such a firestorm going back to Monday. Let me show you this quote on the screen. This is Dan Mullen from today, SEC coaches teleconference. He says, before we get going here, I'd like to touch on something for all the Gator Nation of all our great. This is such a politician's move. When you clearly say the wrong thing and you have to come out and they call this walking it back. He wants to distance himself from his previous comments. He says, I'd like to touch on something for all the Gator Nation. All our great fans of something that was taken out of context on Monday's press conference. How dare the media quote me accurately. He says, as it pertains to recruiting, our staff recruits nonstop. We grind at recruiting every day. We're always recruiting and always working the best to get great players that fit the Gator standard and bring them here to our program, blah, 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 blah. He says, on Monday, I was just saying we're not going to get into the specifics of everything we do in recruiting. Here's the issue, though, is that by moving this to kind of a intramural squabble of what did Mullen mean when he said there's a recruiting part of the year and a time of the year, and I don't want to talk about recruiting, it's not that time of the year. What he's actually doing is changing the subject off of what ought to matter the most to Florida fans. Now, you could say, well, BA, you're not a Florida fan, you're a Georgia fan, you're just mocking Dan Mullen for all of this. But honestly, for the Florida fans who are watching right now, I mean, ask yourself the honest question. Am I not speaking for you on the way that you feel about this? You know that meme that exists, the worst person you know made a good point on the internet? For some of you, I may be the worst person you know. But on this particular issue, I don't think that I'm out of step with what Florida fans believe. Like, they want Mullen to have to answer these questions. They want Mullen to give account for not when they're recruiting, but the results they're getting for the recruits they're trying to bring in. Why they're not getting more defensive linemen. Why they're not winning with more high-powered offensive weapons, not counting the transfer portal. These are the kinds of things that Florida fans want to ask, and they want Mullen to answer. And so when Mullen says, my words on Monday were taken out of context, well, if that be the case, then go back and answer the question to begin with. Go back and tell us, does the recruiting process for Florida need to be overhauled so that you can get better players? Don't tell me about the process. Show me the results. In this particular case, I don't think Mullen very much wanted to do that. So pretty interesting stuff all the way around there. Let's quickly look at the other games of the weekend now here in SEC Country Live. We'll still squeeze in some more of your comments before we're done, but let's do a few of these right now as part of our Bet US Best Bets. Of course, this is a great time to be involved with Bet US. There's still time to sign up and take advantage of a huge offer right now. You can get a 125% initial sign-up bonus when you use the promo code SEC125 at betus.com. That's SEC125 at betus.com. What that means is that when you sign up, BetUS is going to put more money in your account to begin with than you put. Let's just say you put $100 in there. Well, BetUS is going to put $125 in there. They're putting more money in your account than you're putting in your account. You are literally a winner before you even place your first bet. So betus.com is the website. SEC125 is the promo code, and you can get 125% on your initial deposit. A big bonus to you coming there because of that. All right, let's roll through these games. I'll do these relatively quick because we're a little short on time here today. But here are the games. Georgia's obviously the number one team in the country. Missouri hasn't covered the spread all season long. 38 still a lot of points. I could see Georgia win 37-0 as a for instance on this. I do not like Georgia minus the 38. I think this could be Missouri's first cover of the year just simply because 38 so many points. I think Liberty Ole Miss is a really fun game. Hugh Freeze coming back to Oxford. I guess I like Ole Miss. Bouncing back off a loss to Auburn here. This is probably a stay away from me all the way around. My guess is Hugh Freeze has some motivation to come back to a place where his career, at least as a major college coach, came to an end, and he's got a quarterback in Malik Willis that could help get that done. But, Ole Miss, for the most part, has played fairly consistently all year long. 9.5 is not a ton of points here. I guess I kind of like Ole Miss there a little bit, but not a strong play on that game. I do like Texas A&M to a pretty strong degree there. They've now covered, 4 of their last 5 games at Kyle Field after having a stretch of 4 of 6 non-covers before that. People remember losing to Mississippi State. We said before that was the game that kind of reminded folks of, wow, boy, it seems like Texas A&M's had some issues at home. But since then, they got the outright head-to-head win against Alabama, played better against the spread there at home. This is one of those moments. You got the veteran coach established in the program. You've got the better overall recruiting classes going back a number of years. There ought to be a built-in advantage for A&M here on this particular Saturday. I do like the Aggies against Auburn. Arkansas, Mississippi State is certainly a very interesting game. Bulldogs were ranked in the top 25 this past week. They played better away from home lately than you might think. You sort of wonder if that luck runs out on Saturday. I think Alabama's incredibly motivated against LSU. In fact, we've heard Brian Robinson talk about this, that they don't like the way in which LSU really crowed after beating them in 2019. And just because Ed Orgeron's a lame duck doesn't mean Alabama's going to let them off the hook on Saturday. I think this could get ugly for the Crimson Tide, still feeling pretty good about beating up on LSU. Kentucky-Tennessee is a fascinating game. Tennessee's actually played better with first-year coach Josh Heupel than I would have imagined. Kentucky last week let me down at Mississippi State. I was on them minus what would have been 1.5 at the time. They did nothing offensively on the road against the Bulldogs. Will Rogers had a huge day torching the Wildcats defense as well. I'm going to go back to Kentucky again this week, maybe against my better judgment, but that's what I'm going to do. You look at Florida, think about what happened to them late season a year ago, the game against LSU. After losing 4 times, does this Gators team still want to play for Dan Mullen right now? Is there anything to play for here? 18 points seems like a lot. I think it's worth taking the flyer on the Gamecocks plus the points there at home. Those are your BetUS best bets for the week. And as I said before, check out betus.com. Use the promo code SEC125 to take advantage of a big initial deposit bonus. They're going to put more money in your account than you do. It's a great way to take advantage of a sports book that's been satisfying customers here in America for more than 25 years. You don't last that long unless you're taking good care of your customers, good care of your players. That's what BetUS does. BetUS.com, promo code SEC125. Get yourself 125% initial sign-up bonus. All right, we're going to do a funny a funny SEC LOL before we're done here today. I'd like to kind of close the show in kind of a lighthearted way. And boy, you want to talk about a story this week that's dominated college football. Dan Mullen, so thankful to be pushed off of the front page in the college football world for the strangest of reasons. We will make that the focus of our SEC LOL coming up here before we're done. Before that, though, I mentioned Ed Orgeron and LSU. You got to think that Orgeron's not having a very good time right now. This is kind of an alpha dude. This is kind of a guy that likes to be the chest out, big, tough football coach. And he's been relegated to lame duck status there at LSU, coaching for a team that's on its way for trying to find a new coach and trying to move on from the Orgeron era. And this week he was asked a question that he kind of misinterpreted. Let me explain this to you so you can understand the audio you're about to hear. So Orgeron was asked about scouting. And Orgeron took that question to mean scouting the opponent that scouting the opponent that LSU is about to play Alabama. But instead, the questioner was asking him about self-scouting. What does he see during a bye week when he looks in on what LSU is doing well and what it needs to do better? At that point in time, the tone of Orgeron's response changed dramatically, and he ripped unmercifully his own team and apparently his coordinators as well. This gives you an idea for how tense things may have gotten at LSU as of late. Here is Ed Orgeron on a tough answer to a relatively simple question. Take a listen to this.
Used last week to do a lot of scouting. What did you come up with, and how confident are you that your coaches kind of learned a lot about your team?
Yeah, well, they're very good, as always. Very well coached. On us. Okay, on us. Well, on self-scouting, we're too predictable about formations, too predictable on first down. We're very, very predictable on defense. We need to have more of a variety on first down. We are giving them the same looks over and over again. There's not much disguise. What we line up in, we were in. So we got to, you can't, this part of the season, you just can't put a lot of new stuff in. But we put in a couple little wrinkles and make it tough. And then the biggest part for us on defense is adjusting. We have not been in the right adjustments. We have not been in the right position according to some formations. So we had an adjustment period all last week, adjustment period all this week. We've been doing it, but we're really, really honing in and being in the right place at the right time.
So Ed Orgeron's fairly obviously not having a very good time right now, saying, what do you think about scouting? Oh, scouting Alabama, they're great. No, I'm talking about scouting your own team. Oh, we're too predictable. We do the same thing every single time. It's fairly obvious that Orgeron's not having a very good time, and I think he knows deep down, something we talked about before, that for Alabama, this game on Saturday still feels a little bit personal. I think he knows he's got a beat down coming, and for an ego that's probably already been bruised a good bit, even more bruising of that ego would seem to be coming on Saturday. Does not sound like Orgeron's having very much fun. This is also the time of the year in the SEC that I love, because while you got a few teams kind of flying high, you got a few teams that are also just on the verge of an absolute meltdown, if they haven't already had one. LSU and Florida, and you can probably pick out a couple of others that are just on the verge of absolutely melting down. And it's just the fun of the SEC, man. There's a lot of passion around here, and it creates for great drama each and every week. All right, before we do our SEC LOL and get ready to wrap up here today, let's get a few more comments here really quick. Tim Allen checks in to say Ole Miss only beat Arkansas by a point. Yeah, I mean, I actually like Arkansas against Mississippi State on Saturday because I do think for the most part Arkansas has been a pretty good team thus far this season. I think Sam Pittman's doing a pretty good job, and I think for Mississippi State that's probably proven more than I expected it to. There's also a moment in which that kind of runs out, and if you're Arkansas and you've been kind of trending the wrong direction and Mississippi State's been trending the positive direction, I think both teams have a tendency to want to regress towards the middle, which I think cause you to like Arkansas a little bit on Saturday. Scott Burnett says all fans keep up with recruiting. The Florida isn't getting players, and there's a problem. That's right. It's the Florida fans themselves that are the most frustrated by Dan Mullen's answers. It's not the opposing fans, the rival fans mocking Dan Mullen. It's the Florida fans themselves who want answers to this of where are our good players? Where are our 4- and 5-star guys? Where are our guys, especially in the lines of scrimmage? It's the actual Florida fan who wants these answers from Dan Mullen. It's why the media is pushing them as hard as they are. Jerry Popham checks in. It's always great to see Jerry. A couple more really quick ones. Jason Barrett says that Dan Mullen's the cousin Eddie of the South, and yeah, he really is that for sure. Jimmy McGee says, what's the committee telling the fans? It's not moved Alabama to 2. Alabama has to lose 3 games for them not to go to the top 4. Do you really think that's right? I mean, it's not a given that Alabama can make the playoff with 2 losses, although I believe it's a possibility. But I also, here's the thing that I think is the most wrong, Jimmy, and you may disagree with this, but it's something I feel strongly about. I don't want to see teams rewarded just because they have a pretty record. I mean, there's some people who are going to look at a Wake Forest if Wake were to go undefeated. And y'all, there's a chance it does. I mean, Wake Forest got a pretty high-powered offense against the averages grits teams that it's playing. There are going to be some people would say, well, Wake Forest deserves it more than Alabama because Wake's 13-0 and Alabama lost twice. But that only works if you're playing the same schedule. If you're not playing the same schedule, I think you have to look at who's played the toughest teams. Wake Forest didn't have to go to Texas A&M. I think most of us would have a pretty strong assumption of what would happen if it did have to do that. Wake Forest didn't have to, play Ole Miss, play LSU this Saturday, certainly play Georgia in an SEC championship. That's not the path that Wake Forest has been asked to travel. So their record alone is not enough for me to say they're more deserving than Alabama. I do want to bring the discussion in of who truly is the better team. And do you really know anybody that can make a convincing argument for Wake being better than Alabama? So whether Alabama has one loss or two losses, the fact that they have a loss does not exclude them from the playoff discussion for me, even though as a Georgia fan, I'd love nothing more than to push them out there. I mean, Georgia's path to a national championship is made way easier if Bama's not included. But if they are, and I think they probably should be a part of that discussion, then a team like Wake Forest or Cincinnati or even Oklahoma having a prettier record than Alabama, to me that only means so much in regards to who truly is the best team. But I think it's a fun topic. Jay Shipe says South Carolina is the only home team not favored on Saturday. That's pretty interesting. Bo Molinari says the Gators need Lane Kiffin. Boy, Lane Kiffin could be a hot commodity here this offseason. Mark Morris says one-loss teams that get in before two-loss Bama, in my opinion, Ohio State, Oregon, maybe Michigan State. The Big Ten team's going to get a good benefit of the doubt. There's no question about that. Big Ten's been a good enough league this year. They probably get some benefit of the doubt. He says undefeated teams that get in before two-loss Bama, Oklahoma and Cincinnati. Oklahoma, yes. I think Cincinnati, maybe not. I think Cincinnati, maybe not. James K. wants to hear a good laugh from me. That's pretty funny. Foster Moss says, do you think the Dogs can get a shutout in 3 of the next 4 games? They got a chance against Missouri. Tennessee would be more difficult. Charleston Southern and Georgia Tech. Yeah, that's actually kind of an interesting thought to think about. Interesting thought to consider. Pretty good stuff. Bo Molinari also says the visor is a dumb look. Johnny Lester checks in to say, I don't want Florida to get Lane Kiffin. That would be a dangerous combination. Hugh Freeze either. So there are a lot of Georgia fans and a lot of other rivals to Florida that kind of like Dan Mullen being there because as long as Mullen's not recruiting any better than he is and disregarding the idea of recruiting when pressed about that during his press conferences, that the rest of the SEC has it just a little easier than it should. Remember, the state of Florida is fertile recruiting ground. Miami and Florida State aren't exactly tearing up the world right now. The fact that Florida can't use that more to its advantage, gosh, what does that say about Mullen and those Gators? Pretty fascinating stuff. DJ Jammin' Star checks in with an RTR, so appreciate that. Fun times all the way around. Speaking of fun, maybe not quite so fun, for one local Texas neighborhood related to Halloween this past weekend, and I want to use some social media clips to help tell the story as a part of our SEC LOL today. You may remember former Alabama special teams coach Jeff Banks moved on to Texas. And what you may not know is that Banks apparently lives a fairly interesting social life. Now, this is SEC LOL, and for now, I guess Texas is SEC adjacent before they officially join the league. But so you may be familiar with what I'm going to call Monkeygate here this weekend, going back to what happened in Halloween. Let me start with the background on Jeff Banks as explained on social media. This goes back a while, but Aggies fans certainly noticed this, including Gig'em Aggies here on Twitter who says, you can't make this up. The Longhorns just hired Jeff Banks, who left his wife and kids to be with a stripper named Pole Assassin, who has been on Jerry Springer, has a pet monkey, who is a part of her stripping act. Which core value is this again, he says sarcastically. And you can see the pictures there of the appearance on Jesse Springer. You actually see the monkey on the pole, which is a statement that I didn't think I'd ever make here on SEC Country Live. But if you look at the bottom right corner there, you see Pole Assassin's monkey apparently involved in the... First of all, how do you get a monkey to even do that? I guess it's not that much different than climbing a tree, but it's a lot slicker, isn't it? Nonetheless, that's Pole Assassin's monkey. And moving towards Halloween, Pole Assassin's given name of Danielle Banks says, hey, my neighbors have built a haunted house maze at my house. I'm welcoming all kids Sunday from 7 to 9:30. Adults are also welcome too. There's a party from 7-11, so swing by, she says. Well, a lot of you know what happened next. It was reported that a credible source said that a Texas Longhorn special teams coach Jeff Banks' monkey, first of all, it's not his monkey, it's Pole Assassin's monkey, but the monkey allegedly attacked and seriously hurt a young trick-or-treater last night for Halloween. The monkey's jaws apparently had to be pried off the small child, and that part of this is very serious, obviously. I hope the child is okay. But for Banks' wife, she's deleted her Twitter. This has turned into a total disaster. And it just goes to show you there's just really nothing like what happens in college football, where the wife of an assistant coach has a monkey that she uses for her professional career that got loose in a homemade haunted house, attacked a child. And you want to talk about every message board, every social media outlet, everything just exploding around all of this. This truly was a special time, and I couldn't get enough of this the other night. We'll make that your SEC LOL here for today. Thank you for being here for SEC Country Live today. Certainly appreciate that. Enjoy you checking in every Wednesday at this time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube and Facebook. Hope all of you have a great week. Enjoy the games here this weekend. Be careful for errant monkeys that may be running around your neighborhood, especially on Halloween, and we will talk to you again next time.